What if I told you that for the last 2,000 years, we haven't been looking at a queen, but at a ghost? A ghost conjured by her enemies, painted by men who never saw her, and sold to us by a Hollywood machine that cared more about ticket sales than the truth. For centuries, the world has been obsessed with one name, Cleopatra. We've seen her as a porcelain-skinned seductress, a tragic lover, a woman who used her beauty to bring the Roman Empire to its knees. But history is a deck of cards, and science just pulled an ace that collapses the whole house. Before we dive into the DNA results that have left the world of archaeology in total shock and forced historians to burn their textbooks, do me a huge favor. If you love unearthing the darkest secrets of the past, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on all notifications. And if you're ready to see the real face of the Nile's last pharaoh, smash that like button. It really helps the channel bring these mysteries to light. Done? Good. Because the story doesn't start in Egypt. It starts with a skeleton in a closet, literally. Deep in the heart of modern-day Turkey, in the ancient city of Ephesus, a tomb lay silent for 2 millennia at the Temple of Artemis. When archaeologists first cracked it open in 1926, they found the remains of a young woman. At the time, they didn't realize they were looking at the key to the greatest mystery of the ancient world. This wasn't just anyone. This was Princess Arsinoe IV, Cleopatra's younger sister. The sister Cleopatra didn't just exile. She had her hunted down and murdered. For decades, Arsinoe's bones sat in storage, gathering dust, ignored by a world that thought it already knew everything about the Ptolemaic bloodline. They thought the family was purely Greek, a closed circle of Macedonian DNA that never touched the soil of the land they ruled. They were wrong. For 3,000 years, the pharaohs ruled the Nile. But by the time Cleopatra VII ascended the throne, the glory was fading. She was the last of the active pharaohs, ruling a civilization under the shadow of the Roman eagle. We are told she was a polyglot who spoke 9 languages, the first of her dynasty to actually bother learning the Egyptian tongue. We are told she was an intellectual titan, a master of mathematics and philosophy. But when you look at the coins minted during her reign, you don't see Elizabeth Taylor. You see a woman with a sharp, prominent nose, strong features, and a gaze that looks like it could cut through stone. The gap between the Hollywood Cleopatra and the historical Cleopatra is a canyon filled with Roman propaganda. You see, the Romans didn't just defeat Cleopatra, they tried to erase her. To the victor go the spoils, but also the right to write the script. Writers like Plutarch and Cassius Dio weren't interested in her political genius or her economic reforms. They needed a villain. They needed to explain to the Roman public why their greatest generals, Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, had lost their minds in the East. Their answer? Exotic magic. Irresistible, dangerous, non-European beauty. They turned a sovereign ruler into a seductress because a brilliant woman was too terrifying for the Roman psyche to handle. But as the centuries passed, the propaganda became the truth. Renaissance painters depicted her with ivory skin that wouldn't last 10 minutes in the Egyptian sun. Victorian scholars categorized her as a Macedonian Greek transplant, an ethnic outsider ruling over an Egyptian population with 0 genetic crossover. It was a neat, tidy narrative of European superiority. But science doesn't care about narratives. Science cares about base pairs, double helixes, and the cold, hard reality hidden in the marrow of ancient bone. For decades, the hunt for the real Cleopatra was a ghost story. Archaeologists spent lifetimes scouring the sands of Alexandria, hoping to find the tomb she reportedly shared with Mark Antony. But the Mediterranean had other plans. Tsunami after earthquake, the royal quarters of ancient Alexandria eventually slipped beneath the waves, taking the queen's final resting place with them into the dark, salty depths. Without a body, there was no DNA. Without DNA, there was no truth, only the echoes of Roman propaganda. But then, scientists turned to a dark family secret. The Ptolemaic dynasty was famous for its purity, a polite way of saying they practiced extreme intermarriage for nearly 300 years to keep power within the family. In the eyes of a geneticist, this wasn't just a scandal, it was a roadmap. Because they kept their bloodline so isolated, Cleopatra's relatives carried massive, overlapping segments of her own genetic code. Enter Arsinoe IV. Cleopatra's younger sister wasn't just a rival, she was a threat. After a failed power struggle, Cleopatra had her exiled and eventually ordered her execution at the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus. In 1926, a mysterious tomb was discovered at that very temple. Inside lay the skeleton of a young woman. For nearly a century, these bones sat in storage, waiting for the world to catch up. Extracting DNA from a 2,000-year-old skeleton isn't like a TV crime show. It's a battle against time itself. DNA is fragile. It's a delicate thread that begins to unravel the moment life ends. Heat, moisture, and even the chemistry of the soil act like acid, breaking the genetic code into billions of microscopic jagged shards. To find the truth, researchers had to enter clean rooms, sterile environments where even a single stray skin cell from a modern scientist could ruin the entire project. They used specialized drills to penetrate the densest parts of the bone, looking for a genetic time capsule that hadn't been touched by the outside world for millennia. Using cutting-edge sequencing technology, they began the agonizing process of shotgun sequencing, taking those billions of broken fragments and trying to piece them back together like a jigsaw puzzle with 10,000 missing pieces. Intermission. Don't miss the reveal. We are about to cross the threshold into the results that shook the world. If you've made it this far, you are a true history buff. Take a quick second to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support allows us to keep digging into the archives and bringing these hidden stories to life. Now, back to the lab. The team didn't just run the test once. In the world of high-stakes archaeology, a single mistake becomes a scandal. They had to verify that the DNA was genuinely ancient and not a modern contaminant. Multiple independent laboratories across the globe analyzed the samples, cross-referencing the results with massive databases of Mediterranean and Middle Eastern populations. Every genetic marker had to match. Every test had to be perfect. And then, the screen flickered to life. The sequence was complete. For the first time in history, we weren't looking at a painting or a coin. We were looking at the biological reality of the woman who ruled the Nile. The results didn't just clarify her history. They ignited a firestorm that would challenge everything we thought we knew about race, power, and the ancient world. The academic community held its breath. The Macedonian Greek narrative was about to face its greatest trial. Because the DNA didn't show a pure, isolated lineage. It showed a woman who was a product of a world far more diverse, far more messy, and far more beautiful than the historians of the 19th century were willing to admit. The moment the data finalized, the air in the lab changed. Scientists who had spent decades studying the Ptolemaic dynasty were looking at a screen that told a story they weren't prepared to hear. For centuries, the academic consensus was that Cleopatra was a pure Macedonian Greek, a product of a family that isolated itself from the people it ruled. But the DNA results, once published in peer-reviewed scientific journals, sent shockwaves through the world. The story hidden in the genes was far more complex, far more diverse, and far more revolutionary than anyone had dared to imagine. The genetic analysis revealed significant North African ancestry in the lineage. This was the first domino to fall. It suggested that the Ptolemies hadn't just lived in Egypt. They had become part of it, mixing with local Egyptian populations far more than any historical record ever admitted. The markers showed clear connections to ancient Egyptian populations, proving that at least one ancestor on her father's side had been fully or partially Egyptian. But then came the discovery that would ignite a global debate. Deep within the genetic profile was undeniable evidence of sub-Saharan African heritage. While the fragments of ancient DNA made it difficult to pinpoint an exact percentage, the presence of these markers was a scientific certainty. It spoke of trade routes, of diplomatic marriages, and of the deep, pulsing connection between the Mediterranean and the heart of the African continent. And the revelations didn't stop there. The analysis also found traces of ancestry from the Levant region, modern-day Syria and Lebanon. This was the final piece of the puzzle, suggesting that Cleopatra's unknown grandmother or other maternal ancestors likely came from these diverse regions rather than from Greece. This genetic map changed the way we had to look at her face. For the first time, we could move past the pale-skinned European beauty of Renaissance art and Hollywood screens. The genetic markers associated with skin pigmentation suggest Cleopatra wouldn't have looked like Elizabeth Taylor. She likely had a complexion ranging from Mediterranean olive to darker brown tones. Her features would have been a stunning tapestry of her mixed heritage, a biological reflection of the cosmopolitan world she lived in. The reality was that the purity of the Ptolemaic line was a myth. Cleopatra was not just Greek or just Egyptian. She was a child of the ancient Mediterranean, a woman genetically connected to multiple continents and cultures. She wasn't an outsider ruling a foreign land. She was the living embodiment of the world's most diverse city, Alexandria. At the time, Alexandria was a melting pot, home to Greeks, Egyptians, Jews, Syrians, and Nubians. It was a place where ideas and genes flowed freely across borders. The DNA proved that Cleopatra didn't just rule this world, she was born of it. The announcement of Cleopatra's DNA results didn't just stay in the dusty pages of academic journals. It triggered a global media earthquake that spread faster than any archaeological discovery in decades. Within hours, Cleopatra was trending across every social media platform, sparking a digital battleground where millions of people debated what it meant to be queen in the 21st century. This wasn't just a win for science, it was a cultural reckoning. Nowhere was the panic more visible than in the high-rise offices of Hollywood. For over a century, the film industry had sold us a very specific image of the Egyptian queen, from Claudette Colbert to the legendary Elizabeth Taylor. These were portrayals of white European actresses that reflected the beauty standards of their time, not the biological reality of the past. Suddenly, major studios with Cleopatra projects in development found themselves in a crisis of authenticity. The DNA evidence made it impossible to ignore the questions of representation that they had dismissed for years. Several high-profile films were immediately delayed or completely reconceived to reflect this new, multi-ethnic understanding of her heritage. The blank canvas of Cleopatra was finally being filled in with colors that Hollywood wasn't used to using. While Hollywood scrambled, the world's great museums were facing their own identity crisis. Institutions that had for decades presented Cleopatra as a straightforwardly Greek ruler now looked at their own exhibits with a sense of embarrassment. From the British Museum to the Louvre, curators began the painstaking process of updating their materials. Ancient displays were revised to highlight the cosmopolitan, hybrid culture of Ptolemaic Egypt, a world where the lines between Greek, Egyptian, and African weren't just blurred, they were non-existent. Some museums even commissioned radical new reconstructions of the queen's face, using the genetic data to replace the idealized pale-skinned statues that had dominated historical imagination for centuries. But as the truth spread, so did the friction. Social media erupted into a war of hashtags. While many celebrated the findings as proof that the ancient world was far more diverse than we were taught, others met the science with skepticism or outright hostility, clinging to the old myths of purity. Fact-checkers worked overtime to combat a surge of sensationalized YouTube videos and memes that claimed more than the data actually proved. Yet despite the chaos, something incredible happened. Attendance at Egyptian exhibitions skyrocketed. People weren't just going to see gold and mummies. They were going to find a human connection to a woman who finally felt real. The discovery reminded us that history isn't a static story written in stone. It's a dynamic, living conversation that can be overturned the moment we find the courage to look closer at the evidence. The successful sequencing of Cleopatra's genetic code through her sister's remains didn't just solve a single historical mystery. It handed us a key to a door we didn't even know existed. It proved that ancient DNA technology is the ultimate time machine, capable of reaching back 2 millennia to correct the record where human memory and human bias failed. This discovery has launched a new era of molecular archaeology. Scientists now realize that museum basements and storage facilities across the globe are effectively gold mines. They contain thousands of skeletal samples that were once thought to be silent. But now, with these new techniques, they are ready to talk. Every fragment of bone potentially holds the secret to ancient migration patterns, the spread of diseases, and the truth about how our ancestors actually lived and moved. Perhaps the most profound lesson from Cleopatra's DNA is the realization that our modern ideas about race and ethnicity simply didn't exist in the same way 2,000 years ago. In the ancient Mediterranean, identity was fluid. It was defined by the language you spoke, the gods you worshipped, and the city you called home, rather than the percentages in your genetic code. Cleopatra was a child of the world because she lived in a world that was already interconnected long before the age of the internet. But the story isn't over. While we now have a genetic profile of the Ptolemaic line, the hunt for Cleopatra herself, her actual physical remains, has been re-energized. Archaeologists are using these findings to narrow their search in the coastal regions near Alexandria, hoping that one day we won't just have the DNA of her sister, but the queen herself. This journey reminds us that history is never settled. Every generation brings new tools and new questions to the table. What we think we know today might be overturned tomorrow by a single microscopic strand of evidence. Cleopatra's legacy is no longer just a tale of tragic romance. It is a testament to human complexity and the power of science to reclaim the truth from the shadows of propaganda. We are finally moving past the legends to find the woman herself. And as we do, we realize that the real Cleopatra, multicultural, brilliant, and defiant, is far more fascinating than any myth the Romans ever tried to sell us. Thank you for staying through this journey into the past. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the secrets of the Nile, don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you never miss a chance to uncover the truth behind history's greatest legends.